So again, thanks for joining me for this month's webinar, which is also our last one of the year. And that's why we're going to discuss how to complete a year-end review and how to clean up your accounts. Now, if this is your first time joining us, then welcome. I'm Annette with the Recruiterbox team, and if you've ever written into support at Recruiterbox.com, then you might recognize my name. Before we dive in, I'm going to go over the quick plan. It's going to be that I'll chat for 20 minutes, and then I'll leave another 10 minutes at the end for questions. More specifically today, we're going to go over how to clean up your Recruiterbox account, how to pull year-end metrics, and which settings to review before you wrap up 2019. All of this should prepare you and your team for another successful or maybe even more successful year come January. Now, if you have any questions during the webinar, that's great. Just type them into the chat section of GoToWebinar and I'll answer them at the end. First off, I want to tell you all congrats because it's no small feat to get through an entire year of hiring. So let's take a moment to think about all the job descriptions you expertly drafted, all the candidate applications you sifted through, all the interviews you scheduled and conducted, all the feedback and reviews you provided and collected, and of course, all the new all-star hires you added to your team. If you add all that up, it's a lot of data. Time to file things away and get your account ready for a new year, and I'm going to help. Here's how. First, we're going to talk about making decisions on all of your candidates, and then we're going to go over making sure all your openings are in the correct status, including archive for those that you've hired for and are completely done with for the year. Starting with candidates. So hopefully you've been making decisions on candidates as you've reviewed their applications throughout the year. If you haven't, what better way to start than now at the end of the year, ahead of a new year of candidates? All candidates should be in one of the following states: marked as hired or rejected, placed on hold, noted as either withdrawn or declined offer, marked as spam, archived, or kept as in process. We'll go over each one of these now as a quick refresher. First, let's talk about those marked as hired or rejected. These candidates have gone as far as they can in the hiring process, ultimately getting hired or rejected. You should mark candidates as one of these the moment you make a decision on them to ensure accurate reporting, particularly for the time to hire report. Now, if you've only been marking candidates as hired and not marking the others as rejected, now would be a good time to start. Think of it as training yourself to do this moving forward in the new year. Next, we have candidates placed on hold. These candidates are currently in process, but you can't take them forward for any number of reasons. For example, maybe your team has a hiring freeze until January 1st, or the candidate isn't available to start for a while, but you're still interested in them, so marking them as rejected does make sense. In cases like this, placing them on hold will remove them from your active hiring pipeline view, and then they'll return to the pipeline based on a date of your choosing. Next, we have withdrawn or declined offer. Like hired or rejected candidates, these candidates have also gone as far as they can in the hiring process, but weren't hired or rejected. Either they've chosen to withdraw themselves from consideration, or you actually offered them the position, but they declined it. Like with hired or rejected, mark candidates as one of these at the moment you make that decision for reporting purposes. Now, we also have an option for candidates you aren't actively reviewing. Mark candidates as spam if they aren't real candidates, like maybe someone sent a blank resume, or perhaps they've applied repeatedly to your company and can't take a hint. Mark these candidates as spam to auto-hide future notifications from their profiles, including new incoming messages. That way, you can focus on real candidates. Lastly is archived. Archived candidates are hidden from your active hiring pipeline view without an ultimate decision. Now, while we strongly recommend choosing one of the previous statuses for every candidate, you may want to bulk archive candidates in some cases. For example, if you brought candidates into the system for historical purposes, you can go ahead and just mark those all as archived. I also want to note that just because December 31st hits doesn't mean that you had to have gone through all of your candidates and made a decision on them. If you're still actively hiring for an opening, keep candidates as in process while you continue to review their applications. Candidates who aren't in any of the previously named statuses are considered in process by default. On their profile, you'll see that they're still actively going through stages. Next, let's clamp your existing openings. All openings should be in one of the following statuses: published, internal only, stop accepting candidates, archived, or draft. I'm going to go over each one of these two. Starting with published. So if you're actively hiring for an opening, leave your opening as published. Then it's business as usual. This will keep the opening visible on your hosted site, careers widget, and any job boards that you've placed it on. There's also the internal only status. If you're looking to fill an opening with someone already at your company or perhaps through a referral, move your opening to unpublished and use internally to process internal candidates. This hides the job from anywhere public. Then you can either upload a candidate's resume manually or send them an application link directly. Next is the stop accepting candidate status. If you've received enough candidates and want to hit pause on new applications, move your opening to stop accepting candidates. This removes the job from anywhere public to give you time to process existing candidates. To start accepting applications again, simply move the status back to published. Finally, if you've marked your dream candidate as hired and you aren't looking for any more hires, then go ahead and archive your opening to file it away ahead of the new year. Now here's a pro tip for prepping for the coming year. If you already have a list of jobs you'll need to hire for come the new year, you can begin building the openings now and save them as drafts. When you return in the new year, just switch the status to publish to start collecting candidates and send your job to the job board. Seriously, imagine going live with a bunch of openings on the first day you're back at the office. This could put your team ahead of schedule, and that's not a bad way to start the year. Okay, now that you've got all your data in order, let's see how your team did this year. What areas did they excel at? Where can your team improve? What's working and what's not? Now I'm going to focus on a few key reports that I believe will provide some great year-end insights. These reports include candidate sources to learn what works for you, coordinator activity to see who did what, stage movement to find areas you can improve, candidate end states to understand why candidates didn't work out, and the overall candidates report to answer almost all your other questions. Let's start with a source report. So this report tracks where all your candidates are coming from. This is actually my favorite report because I find it really interesting to see where candidates are or aren't coming from. Like sometimes we'll post a job on a site that we're sure we're going to get great candidates from, but when we look at this report, it turns out we rejected almost all of those. At a glance, see what links are garnering the most candidates and whether they're getting hired or rejected. After all, hiring is about quality, not quantity of candidates. I recommend filtering your source report by January 1st to December 31st of this year to see this year's top sources for quality candidates across your entire account or even by opening. This can vary from year to year. As an action item at the end of the year, you could put together a list of sources you want to focus on in the new year and then take a break from posting to sites that just didn't produce hires, even if they have in the past. I also want to go over the coordinator activity report. This report helps you monitor and compare the work and workload contributed by your stage coordinators. At a glance, see who's doing what and how much, such as how many candidates they've each screened, how many reviews they've initiated and interviews scheduled, how many candidates they marked as hired, and how many candidates they manually added, if that's something that your team does. Use the data in your coordinator activity report to understand who on your team contributed the most this year. As an action item, review this report and use the numbers to set expectations for next year. Are you noticing trends and averages across the board? If so, you can use those as benchmarks for your new hires. That way, your expectations aren't just what you're hoping your team can do, but what your team has already proven as reachable. You can also use this data to reward your team. For example, if you're looking to promote team members or give year-end bonuses, this report can give insight into who's gone above and beyond. Now, if you're looking to gauge the efficiency of your hiring workflows, check out the stage movement report. This report tells you how fast candidates are moving through stages. At a glance, see the average time in days that candidates are in each stage of each opening. You can use the data in this report to identify bottlenecks in your hiring workflow and help improve the hiring process for both your hiring team and candidates. An action item here would be to review the stages that candidates are getting stuck in or are spending the longest period of time in, and then come up with a plan to make these stages more efficient. Ask yourself, what's causing the blockage here? Is it a coordinator issue? Like, is the person you've put in charge not the right person to be managing this particular stage? Or is it the nature of the stage and its requirements? That is, are you just requiring too much to be done in a single stage, and maybe you should break those tasks up into different stages? Or maybe it's a combination of both. Maybe the stage just has too much for a single person to manage. These are the kinds of questions you should be asking yourself. Another report to review is your candidate end states report. This report was previously known as the rejections report, but we recently revamped it to include other end states such as withdrawn and declined offer. At a glance, see the individual reasons why candidates in specific openings weren't hired, along with percentages. Now filter this report by specific candidate end states to identify trends with candidates you didn't end up hiring. Then refine your hiring processes to decrease ineligible candidates and stop dream hires from slipping through your fingers. One action item here is to emphasize requirements in next year's batch of job descriptions, along with adding qualifier questions to your application form. For example, if your end states report shows that candidates are rejected because they lack a certain skill, be sure that your job postings note that skill as a requirement. You may also want to add questions about this skill directly on the application form. You can also determine what is needed to secure the candidates you want to hire. For example, if candidates are regularly declining your offers because you're lacking a benefit or perk they expect, maybe it's time to start offering it or something comparable. Lastly, I want to mention your candidates report. The candidates report is an exportable spreadsheet of all your candidate application data for a certain period. It's a lot of data, but it's worth having a look through. And because it's compiled into a spreadsheet, you can filter and sort the data in any number of ways to glean insight into your hiring beyond our standard report. By the way, if your team has a policy of cleaning up candidate data from the system every year, you can download a candidate report for this year to store the data offline before removing it from the system. Now, a newer feature I want to mention here is our scheduled report. If you found yourself pulling the same reports all year to share with the same people, you can save some time in the new year by scheduling those reports to auto-send to select teammates. Reports on specific plans have a schedule report button near the top right of the report page. Click this to begin building your custom report and set the schedule. On that new page, you'll be able to set filters for the report, name the report, select the frequency that the report will be sent, select your group of recipients, and even customize the email that will accompany the report. In addition, recipients don't even have to go into the system to see the report. They'll be able to download it straight from their email. Okay, so before we wrap things up, I thought I'd go over a few personal and team-wide settings that we recommend you review and edit as needed. These include email notifications, calendar sync, user access, and team-created content and customization. I'm also going to go over each one of these right now. First up are email notifications. Have you been getting the email notifications you need, or have you been getting notified all year of items you prefer to see in-app? Maybe your team roster changes a lot, and we've been sending you an email every time a user is added or deleted from your account, and you decided, yeah, you just don't really need that notification anymore. Basically, now's a great time to review your email notification preferences and make changes. Now, how about calendar sync? Has your team been managing calendars manually? Have you been messaging colleagues asking them when they're free to take an interview? There's lots of back and forth with that. If so, do yourself a favor and initiate a team-wide calendar sync to start the new year off with in-app visibility of your team's availability. Once your team's calendars are synced, you'll be able to see when your interviewers are free right when you're scheduling interviews. So you can quickly pick a time that works for everyone without having to coordinate via email, DM, text message, or maybe even having to get up and go to someone's office. Next up, let's talk about user access. Have some team members moved on, or have you moved on from some recruiting agencies? If so, be sure to deactivate their access. You should be doing this the moment someone stops working for you, but now is also a good time to do it. This can be done by super admin users from two different places under settings. First, if you go to settings and users, you'll be able to see a list of all your active team members. These are the users who have valid logins to your account. Make sure that these are all current employees. And if you come across one that isn't, simply click deactivate next to their name and their logins will become invalid. If by chance they're still logged in, they'll be immediately logged out. Next, if you need to remove some external recruiting agencies, go to settings, then recruiting agencies. Here you'll see a list of all your active agencies and you can simply click on one and you'll have an option to deactivate them. In either case, you can always reactivate a login, which is helpful if you decide to start working with an agency again, or if a seasonal or contracted employee gets hired again. Next, let's review your job board settings. We integrate with several popular job boards, including Indeed, Glassdoor, and Facebook. Have you been utilizing these integrations to their fullest power, or did your annual source report suggest that you should stop sharing jobs with a particular board? You can enable or disable auto sharing with individual job boards under settings. I do want to note here that our Facebook integration was launched just earlier this year. And for existing accounts at that time, we kept this job board disabled so that we didn't start sharing your jobs without your acknowledgement. If you have yet to connect Facebook in your account, try enabling it and see how Facebook Jobs works for your hiring in 2020. Lastly, I want to talk about all your team-created content and customizations. Throughout the year, individual team members may have been adding content to customize their Recruiterbox experience, which is great. But over time, you may end up with a lot of stuff and maybe even duplicates. End of the year is a good time to go through this content and clean things up. That means deleting or deactivating items your team isn't using and consolidating duplicates. This applies to a number of areas under settings, included but not limited to your email templates, questionnaires, reasons for reject and other decision states, custom fields on openings, candidate labels, and custom sources. I'd recommend going through each of these and any other settings that your team may have customized, and make sure that 2020 starts off with only the custom content that is still relevant. So just to recap, today we went over cleaning up your account, including decisioning candidates and archiving openings, looking at year-end metrics via reports, and reviewing account settings, including personal settings and team-wide settings.